Good afternoon, everybody. It's Richard De Silva here from Banyard Solutions, ready to run the webinar on overcoming the barriers to replacing paper systems with electronic systems. We've had a couple of people just join the last few minutes, so I just want to wait and see if anybody else joins. So bear with us just for one more minute and we'll kick it off then. Yeah, I just had another person join, so we'll be going fairly soon. Anyone else can then catch up. But anybody that's registered, of course, will get an emailed link to the webinar, so they can then watch it at leisure at their own time. Okay, well, we'll get started now. Again, welcome to the e-permits webinar. It's going to be quite a short one today, which you'll probably be very pleased about. But what I want to introduce you to is some new concepts that we've now brought in terms of something we call standard data sets. And that means that implementation of e-permits is very, very quick now, and you can be generating permits literally within days of starting your project. And then you have the opportunity to refine things based on your experience of using the system to get into some more detailed analysis and the more detailed permitting over time. But it allows people a very quick start into the system. So, okay, overcoming the barriers. There's no long-term gain without any short-term pain, and we all know that electronic systems are always better than paper-based systems for a number of reasons. You can see there, more robust, they're more reliable, there's lower risks of error, there's lower maintenance, it's time-saving, it's faster and efficient, and the list goes on, on and on. And to try and implement them, though, is the thing that often causes the pain. The end result is good, but implementing and trying to get there is difficult. And there are lots of commercial issues, practical business issues, and operational issues around these problems. Commercially, there's always additional cost in putting software solutions in place. I mean, yes, there's always a cost of paper that's there within any system, but adding a software product into a place obviously adds some additional cost to it. And a large chunk of that cost is often in terms of the initial implementation of a system. There's operational issues with regard to time and resource. If you put rubbish data in, you get rubbish data out. So you have to spend time as you understand your buildings, your site, and all of your assets on that site in making sure that the data in a system can get populated. And that can sometimes take a long time, and that's causing problems, has been causing problems with customers in the past, that whilst we can implement something very quickly from our end, the data input end from the client is often the time constraint on a go-live date for a project. And we often find there's slippages. The only time it works properly is when people actually dedicate time and resource to just the project, and then we can actually get these things up and running within a month or two. But it does take that time to get things going. There's data complexity, as I already mentioned. You put rubbish data in, you're going to get rubbish data out. You'll see as we go through the presentation some of the levels of complexity of data that's required to get the system up and running. And then by all means, sometimes the biggest thing is change management. Whenever you put a change of a system in place, those changes cause resistance, and those resistance cause delays. And unless everybody buys into the overall end solution, it's very, very difficult for the overall change to happen. One of these issues is always the time it might take to actually put these back, going back a couple of steps up the list there. The longer it takes for something to come through, the more people are actually used to what they're doing. They know the change is coming, and they tend to build up even more resistance to change through that time. So if you can get something in very, very quickly that shows people that it can provide exactly the same type of solution that they currently use, and over time they'll see that actually there are benefits to them because it saves them time, saves them effort, and often saves them worry, and then that's a good thing. So how do you fix short-term pains? I mean, in general, there's two ways to fix things, and I've used the analogy of a medical situation here. You can take the hit and have the operation immediately, and that means putting time and resource into making sure that something can be configured, tested, checked, and ready to run, and then making sure that everybody gets properly trained and everybody is then an experienced user of a system. It takes time, but once you have it operational and running, everybody is then happy. There's an option, which is we call take a remedy and plan for the operation when you're ready. Now, remedies don't cure pain, they effectively relieve pain, giving you time to address the causes when you're ready. So it's a short-term fix with very positive benefits, but then it allows you to address the real core issue as you go in time and as you start to build experience. So that's where we see the type of solution coming in. So what we're doing with e-permits, based on a number of years of experience of putting these systems in, we've now released a number of what we call prefabricated data sets for standard building configurations, things like offices, data centers, and so forth. So we've built them enough times that we realize there are some core things that exist in every office or exist in every data center. So these data sets enable e-permits to be configured with these pre-built building templates. Clients no longer now have to fill in these complex configuration spreadsheets detailing their buildings to the level of detail that we actually need in e-permits at that level. Now you can just provide a list of contractors, a list of who in their organization approves and issues and closes permits. And we do this now in the one-day kickoff meeting. So we actually get the core information that we need from that kickoff meeting. And then in a few days, you're ready for training and you'll be raising permits and having a viable operating permit system live and running within your organization. We've already done this twice for existing customers, so we know it works, and that's why we've now decided to put this out in a webinar to actually use that experience and show that it actually does do this. So how does this reduce those short-term pains we listed earlier? Well, it actually minimizes cost. It minimizes cost because you're not going to require so much input from ourselves. Not that our input is high, but rather than maybe 5 or 6 days of our time, it reduces it down basically to 1 day, and then you've got training on top of that. It minimizes the time and resource that you have to put in to getting the system up and running. We're removing all of that need for that complex data that I'll actually go through and show you in a moment, and it removes that issue. There's no data complexity. It's very, very simple and straightforward. We've already done the modeling and the building for you. And there's minimal change to the process or the output. We can replicate the paper permits that you currently use. So when the system is running, people at the sharp end, people that actually end up doing the work, they have exactly the same end result that they currently have with your paper systems. And this means you can still get on and do the day job while the permitting system goes in and starts to go live and minimizes that amount of change. So I'm going to start with the custom data set. So this is what we call the traditional build of e-permits. So you need to have a number of bits of information. So firstly, obviously, there's the building name, and then we divide a building into what we call zones. And zones are typically the floors, roof areas, basements, car parks, and so forth. Within zones, you have different location types, and these are listed as, for example, plant rooms, risers, lift cores, and so forth. And then within location types, you have specific locations. So boiler room A, for example, is a plant room, and that may be located in the basement of this particular building. We have then a list of building services, so a whole range of things that are listed in the spreadsheet that you need to identify as to where they are located. So the HVAC boilers are located in boiler room A, in plant rooms in the basement of that building. And then we have a standard list of activities. such as the ones that are shown on the screen, plus many more. And so therefore you attribute activities to services, and this is fairly complex spreadsheets with the objective being that activity takes place on a service, which is in a specific location, which is a member of a location type, which is on a zone and in a building. And the client only, it's only the client that has the knowledge to actually put this information together. We are not able to help with that because they know the details of their building and all of their assets. So just to show you some of these sheets, the building one is very, very straightforward. It's just listing the building and the details of the building. Then we start getting into the more complex sheets. This lists the zones. Here you can see that we have a standard identified list of things. And if you want to call something else, you can put in an alternative name here so that it becomes recognizable to you and to your contractors as being part of your building. As you can see, there are a number of lines above this, and there are a number of lines below this as well. So there are multiple things, and you can add in other ones that are specific to you as well, should you need to. We then get slightly more complex with regard to the different location types. So again, we have a list of typical location types. At the bottom of the list off the screen here, you have a list of others, and you can add things in that may not exist for you. For example, we've just started working with a railway repair depot, and they have some very, what we call non-standard things with regard to pits and overhead cranes and all sorts of things like that they need to add into the system. Here again, if you have this resource or this location type, you put a tick in the box. If you want to change the names of it, you can put a tick in the box and then put an alternative name, and this is what will appear on the sheet, on the permit, sorry. Then we get down to the more detailed things of services, and I'm not covering things like locations and activities at the moment. This is just doing it at a very high level. So with services, again, we have a list of services that lots of people have. And again, you tick a box if you have got, for example, lightning protection. We have a number of areas which have got subsets. So here, for example, plumbing could either be tagged at a top level or it can be tagged at some of the sub-levels. And typically, if you have the same contract that manages all of these areas, all of these activities, you can just tick this box at the top. But if you want to restrict a particular contractor to working on a particular subservice, you tick the individual ones, and then these will come up in a list of things that a contractor can be assigned to. They can only be assigned to things that they are actually qualified to do. So that's quite complex to start with, but now we start to have to get you to build these matrices. This is where you start to map the location types to the zones. So here we want to identify floor 1, or the ground floor, for example, has all of these location types on it. Floor 2 has these ones, floor 4, these ones, the lower basement, and so forth. So again, this is quite a complex, it's pretty logical and straightforward, but to put the time into putting all these things in from the client's perspective can take a while to do and be sure that it's absolutely right. And then we get even more complex where we're now starting to put services into location types. So air conditioning, heating, for example, exists in all different types of location types. The air supply, for example, here only appears in something called the pit area. So this is actually part of an extract from that railway system, where they have a pit area where they obviously have air supplies to do all sorts of work within there. It only exists in that one location. We can list asbestos. So asbestos exists in these places. This is not for the railway company. This is a bastardized sheet, but it shows that you can also log where asbestos exists, and that can then be raised and identified on a permit if activity is taking place in location types. And there are going to be obviously lots and lots of services that we saw, and there are lots and lots of location types within that. So that's what takes time, building those things together. So as you can see, lots of information takes time, and once it's been done, it needs to be uploaded, verified, and checked by our team to make sure there are no gaps, no things that have been identified with nothing in it, and so forth. So why is it necessary to go down to that level? Well, ePermits has the ability to identify clashes. We can identify 3 types of clashes within the system. We can identify clashes in the same location at the same time. We can identify clashes on the same piece of kit at the same time, or we can identify clashes on or dependent services at the same time. So one job scheduled needs the water on, one job scheduled needs the water off. They're both going to happen at the same time, but they're obviously mutually exclusive. So the system gives you the ability to review these clashes and then make intelligent decisions on which one should you bounce, or if you're happy for them both to take place at the same time, which ones do you give an alert to, or do you put an alert on all permits that says, for example, beware other people working in the same location at the same time. So to get to that level of detail on a permit, you need to have this information at that sort of structured level that we saw earlier on. So what are we doing with standard data sets? Standard data sets really gets rid of this whole complex issue. There are no concepts of zones anymore, only what we call the inside and the outside of the building. We have a pre-configured list of location types and pre-configured list of services that are typically applied to the type of data set that we're talking about. So, for example, in offices, you would have certain location types. Within DC's data centers, you would have, for example, data hall. You won't have a data hall in an office, but a data hall is already pre-configured and exists within the location types for data centers. So in essence now, you just check the list and say whether you've got them or not. We can add anything that you have that doesn't appear on the list. And if you don't have something on that list, it won't get uploaded if you haven't checked it. So it does build things very, very quickly. So here's, for example, here's our list of location types. Put an X in the box, say, yes, we've got those. You don't need to worry about where they are. You just need to say, yes, we've got them. And similarly with the services, here's a standard list of services. And this is typically for an office that we're showing here. Everything is there. You tick the boxes where you have got the things that are going to need permitting for. And if you don't tick them, they won't get uploaded. So that's a fairly quick exercise, and we will do that for you in the kickoff meeting. So we come with these lists, and as we go through the kickoff meeting with you, we just go through and check the boxes. So when we walk away from that meeting, we're in a position where we can now upload data immediately within the system. The other thing that we need to do is we need to understand from you your permit approval process. And that's now a very simple spreadsheet where we sample, these are internal people who are approvers. So here's the email address of an individual, his first name and his last name, and then there are a number of different areas. So you can assign permissions. Is this person allowed to review RAMs? Is this person allowed to change data within the system? Is this person allowed to approve permits and so forth? We have RAMs approvers. So again, you can check a box that says yes or no as to whether this person can actually approve RAMs. We've got extra approval levels, but the key ones are obviously the controller approvals. So the extra approvals, are things like, can I issue permits or can I close permits? This is the area where we assign what can be done in terms of the controller approval. So this person here can approve access permits, hot work permits, confined space. And again, we'll build this with you in that kickoff meeting, so you can come to us with a list of individuals. We'll populate that spreadsheet, and then you can then start in the meeting agreeing, say, yes, I want Bob to be able to approve hotworks permits and only hotworks permits. Therefore, anything else won't go to Bob the builder. They'll only go to the individuals that have been tagged as yes, they can actually approve those permits. So that's it. Once we've done that in that kickoff meeting, the only other thing you need to provide us with is a list of your contractors. So that's just information about a company name and one point of contact with an email address. And we manage the whole of the contractor training side of things for you. We put together a web-based training session, which is about an hour and a half, just showing contractors how they can raise permits in the system and how they can upload things like training and competency data. And once that's done, you're ready to actually go live with permits in a couple of days. Now, even that can be broken down a bit to a lower level because the core e-permit system actually is modular. It's actually broken into 4 core modules, what we call permit workflow, which is an essential part. It's the only core part that you have to have because that controls the workflow of the permits. Then there are 3 compliance modules on top, RAMS compliance, where people can submit RAMs to you within the system, and it will cross-check those RAMs, and they can then be selected when you create permit requests. If you already manage RAMs or you want to manage RAMs in a separate way, you can turn that part of the module off, and that obviously has an impact on the cost of the solution because you're buying less software. And similar, we've got compliance modules for contractor and for worker. So contractor compliance monitors things like insurances of the contractor company, as whether or not they're qualified to do things, for example, asbestos. And worker compliance monitors things like training and competency and inductions. Some clients have got their own training and competency management systems in place, so they don't need this in e-permits, so they don't buy that particular part of the module. So you can start right at the bottom case with standard data sets and permit workflow, and you're up, running and going literally within days, and not even have to provide some of the data that we've gone through just now. So just to show you how this works, I actually put together a couple of requests using standard data configuration and then the same piece of work, but done in the more complex setup. So here you can see this is the permit request. This is what would be filled in by the contractor. So they're coming in to do some repair work on the HVAC AC boilers. And once that's been selected, the system knows they exist in engineering plant rooms and they're inside of the building. So there's no information on locations. It's grayed out, so you can't do anything with regard to locations. RAMs are here. So RAMs are applicable to the type of work that's going to be done. And here we've selected a particular type of RAMs. But this is where you can actually put additional information. So when you're filling in your paper permits, you have a box where you put information in that says, this work is going to take place in boiler room 1, in plant room A on the ground floor of the building. So you can still add that information in to that permit request as you're going through the process. So on the permit document, you'll still have the information about what's happening and where. What the system won't do, it won't throw up the clashes in a particular location because there are no locations identified within here. But it'll still throw up clashes within sort of engineering plant rooms, for example. So it's a building services fault, and there's welding and brazing working above plant, and I need an isolation for the boilers and the pressure systems. So that's what's been filled in with regard to doing a standard data configuration. When you fill in the same piece of work using a custom data configuration, you have a little bit more information that appears on here. So now, for example, when I'm doing repair work, I actually select which item I'm working on. So here I'm saying I'm going to be working on boiler 1. And it will then automatically populate the data saying, well, that's part of this service, HVAC heating boilers. I know the location of it because of the X in the box. It's boiler room 1. Boiler room 1 is in engineering plant rooms, and all of these are in the basement of the building. So now you can start to get clash informations on zones, locations, location types, and services as well, and even on individual items. You can still add additional information into the permit request. There's no difference in the software. It's just the data that's behind it that makes the difference. So whether you go for a custom data configuration or a standard data configuration, the software and the software capability is exactly the same. So again, welding, brazing, work above height, and boilers and pressure systems isolation. When we look at the actual permit document, this is the standard data configuration permit itself. This is just our standard permit configuration template. Obviously, we can create these permits to look and feel exactly the same as the permits that you have. So here we're looking at a standard office implementation. It's internal engineering plant rooms, and all locations are controlled by such and such an individual. So this would be the company or the individual within the company that's allowed to manage those areas. Specifies what you want to do, and this is where that additional information would appear. So when you type in that this is actually going to take place in the basement in boiler room 1, it'll be specified here. Tells you about the RAMs that are to be applied to this and lists the special risks, the welding and brazing, the work of a plant, the boilers and the pressure systems. Here's the safety precaution checklist. So before this permit was issued, we actually went through with this particular contractor, ticked all the relevant boxes. And this allows you to do electronic signatures. As you can see down here, this has been electronically signed by an issuer and electronically signed by the acceptor. And there's also a PPE module which specifies the PPE that's to be worn. So again, this is generated in the permit request stage. So the permit requester may have said, I'm going to bring a high-vis jacket, safety boots and helmet. But when it comes to the approver can add to that list and say, no, I want you to add safety spectacles and gauntlets to that list. So the contractor is then alerted that there's been a change to the PPE list, and they then have to turn up with these. And again, in the issuing process, not only are you going through the checklists, but you're also checking that they brought the appropriate PPE for the job before you would sign it and issue it, and before Steve would accept it. When you're looking at the same permit now for the custom data configuration, as you can see here now, we have all the fine detail of the location and the actual item listed in the where part. Specifies again what we're doing, what the permit RAMs are, and again, you can still add further information if you want to on the permit. This is where you might say, for example, beware other people working in the same location. There's no limit to the amount of information you can add to a permit in that particular box. But what we don't need to do now is we don't need to specify all the finite details, and it will also throw up in the approval process now. If I've got a clash, I've got somebody else doing some inspecting of boiler 2149. It'll throw that up, and then you make a decision on what you want to do. Exactly the same things with the checklist, same things with the PPE, and again, the signature, electronic signatures, and so forth, done. So when we're looking at e-permit implementations now, all of our e-permit implementations now start with standard data sets, where they apply, as I say, for offices, data centers, hospitals, things like that, where we already have them. If we come across a client where there are some different buildings or different types of campuses that lend themselves to a standard data set that we would be able to use in the future, we'll develop it and then we make it available to all for future development. Once it's been implemented, you're immediately starting to work with permits at that higher level, the standard data level that we mentioned. And then as you start to gain experience with the permitting system, you can identify there are certain areas where you want to go into more detail, and you can do this whenever you're ready. For example, you may want to specify that work done in individual plant rooms and they're all in the basement. So therefore you can add a new zone called basement and then identify the different plant rooms and the equipment in them. The rest of the building can then stay as a standard data build. But you're now adding the finite detail where it's important to you from a permitting point of view, not necessarily from a point of view of we need to model everything in all detail all the way through the process. So I'm just going to drop into the system. I'm not going to run any demonstration or anything on the system, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to just show you these are the two permits where we saw the ones earlier on, the standard data. So here's custom office, and there's the 4 permits there, and there's the standard office and the 4 permits here. What you see from an approver's point of view, for example, is you see this information. So it shows that there's a clash. That shows the isolation. It's not showing clashes because they've not been set up in that way in this demonstration. But it's actually showing you the mechanical isolation. So you can go and view that isolation information, and that's an internal job. So you need to internally isolate this before the contractor can start work. This specifies the stuff that we saw on the permits. This is what you're seeing at this level. You can still add information to the permit. There's the hot works RAMs, so you can actually view the RAMs at this stage. This stage is actually where we're going to issue the permit. We want to send this out and issue this permit itself. Here's where you can still add in additional isolations should you need to. So I could add in an LV isolation or a fire systems isolation, whatever it is that I want to add in. I'm still in the position where I can now specify and I can add things to the safety checklist should I need to. So I might want to put a face mask in there. There's some construction work going on. I'm issuing the face mask to the contractors. So I've done that, and that's now added to the PPE. So I could then save that data. That's now changed the PPE. I will now sign that that one, and I can then receive that from Steve Charles. It's already been done, but it's showing you how that can be done. And then you're in a position where you can now reprint that permit, and everything's now ready to go. Similarly, if I go back and look at the more detailed one, where we're looking at the standard office. If I look at the standard office one, this is again now at that higher level. Exactly the same information. You can still do all the things that we've just talked about. I've already added face mask in there for this job. There we can specify things, still review the RAMs, so all the functionalities possible that we saw before, but we're now in a position where this is just specifying it's inside the building, it's in a plant room, and it covers all locations. So all locations in what are deemed as engineering plant rooms. So it's that lower level, but here we would detail the information about where it's taking place and what piece of kit it's taking on if you wanted to. So the system works equally well in both modes. It's really now down to the client as to how detailed they want to go. And with the two clients that we've done this for already, they've only gone into detail in certain critical areas of the building where they deem they want to get more detailed permitting information out of the system. So that's, in essence, that's the permitting setup. That's e-permits, showing how we overcome those barriers to paper systems, replacing them with electronic systems. We've done a lot of work over the last few years in building up these standard data sets, and it's now in place. We're releasing it within this current version of the product. The new user interface version comes out next year, which is really a change to the GUI rather than a change to functionality. Some of you, I believe, may have already seen this in some of the early stages of development. But having functionality now put into the current version of the product means that this will now migrate across, so you'll still be able to do all these things and make things even simpler in the new solution. So that concludes the webinar. If anybody wants to have further information or actually see this in more detail, I'm happy to provide one-to-one full demonstrations of the system in both modes, either in standard data mode or in a custom data mode, so you can see the differences. And what we notice is it actually helps clients make their minds up which way they want to go. And very often it has always been, let's start with standard data and then refine it as we go through. So unless anybody has any questions, and you can raise questions in the chat box, and my colleague Neil will be able to relay them to me as we go through the process. I'll give you 1 minute to find out if anyone wants to raise any questions, then I'll ask Neil to let me know if someone has, and I will address them for you. Are there any questions at all, Neil?
Not this time, Richard, no.
Okay. If anybody has any questions they want to pass on later on, my email address is on the screen. I know a lot of you know me already anyway, so please feel free to contact us, and we can take you through any of the areas that you saw within the presentation. So thank you very much, everybody, for attending, and by all means, you will get a link to this webinar. It'll be recorded and tweaked and edited a bit, and it'll be made available to you very soon. So thank you very much indeed, everyone, for attending. Goodbye.